thank you so much for joining us. We know we've got a very busy schedule. For people that aren't aware of who you are, would you mind introducing yourself and just like what your position is, I guess, in relation to the youth arts sector?
Okay. I'm Adrian, Collette, and I'm CEO of the Australia Council for the Arts, which is the federal government's investment and advisory and advocacy body on the arts in Australia. And as part of that, we fund many organisations and artists. So a lot of the youth theatre, youth arts organisations have a relationship with the Australia Council.
Which is obviously huge, and a position that's probably part of a lot of conversations right now. I'm interested in the fact, so obviously you started the position right before COVID.
I did.
And then COVID hit and did the things it's done to everyone, which is just an absolute tumult of action. And then you were also on the board for 5 years prior to that. I'm interested in the time that you've worked in this position and adjacent to this position. What you think some of the biggest challenges are moving forward for the youth arts sector? Like, what are the real road bumps you think that we're looking at overcoming?
Well, I tend to think in opportunities, and that's not euphemistic, but none of us would be involved in what we do if we weren't essentially optimistic. I think, one of the big challenges, as we all know, is that there are many more excellent youth organisations in performing arts in very different kind of art forms than we can fund.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be ever thus. You know, we will be doing everything we can to champion for more funding for arts and creative participation. But such is the level of what I think of as artistically rigorous performance practice, cultural practice in this country. But there's no doubt that it's underinvested. So that is a challenge. The opportunity is that we now have a minister who is very committed to arts and creative practice, but has announced that we are developing a cultural policy for the country. It's not just for the arts, it's for the country. And I think there is such a persuasive story to be told, and I've just heard plenty of that in the seminar room, about not only the artistic excellence of what youth arts organisations do, but the extraordinarily beneficial cultural, social, beneficial impact they have on our communities, that a very, very persuasive case could be made, which underpins the cultural policy.
Yeah, and I think there's a real understanding that we're in the business of making good humans, and that arts is so intrinsically a part of that.
And good societies and good communities. You know, one of the immediate advantages we see in youth arts, in all kinds of arts, is people belong, and they belong in place.
Yeah.
You know, so I think, given there's been a signal to say this country needs a cultural policy, one of the most diverse nations on earth, with this extraordinary gift of First Nations cultural practice, maybe we're ready for this conversation again.
The longest continuing culture of storytelling in the world, which is so exciting. And so that's what we're looking at. We're looking at that opportunity with the new cultural plan, and we're looking at the history of knowing that we're a really scrappy sector. To young artists who over the next 5 years, 10 years, 2 decades or so, that are going to be stepping into leadership positions of the companies they're artists for right now, what's your one piece of advice in the long term to keep this sector thriving? Because you talked a lot about looking in the long term and how this is a long form planning thing. I'm interested for the people that are not quite leaders now, but they'll be leaders in 10 years when we're seeing the outcome of the cultural plan. What's your advice for them?
Do you mean leaders of organisations, or do you mean practising artists?
I think leaders. I think both. I think there's a lot of crossover, and I think particularly the people that are artists now that will become leaders of cultural organisations.
Yeah. So look, I think the difference between being a practicing artist, I'm happy to say my life has been full of those, and those people who take responsibility for an organisation or whatever it is, you have to start making the case.
Yeah.
And you've heard a lot about that today, and when circumstances change, you change the way you're making the case. It doesn't mean that you're not being authentic, it just means you are trying to judge the moment. And I think the moment now, if everyone isn't too exhausted, it is a real opportunity for this country and for people who want to be involved in artistic and creative practice. It doesn't mean everyone will be happy, but it means it's a kind of relevance argument.
Yeah.
So we have a minister saying we need a cultural policy for the country. So if it's adopted by government, health will have a view, foreign affairs will have a view, education by definition will have a view. That is a real moment. So I think the difference, if you want to be involved for the long term and you want to take responsibility for your sector, is you have to be prepared to make the case.
Thank you. That's really concrete, good advice, and a really nice thing to end on.
All right.
Thank you for your time. It's very much appreciated.